Assalamu alaikum. All right, let's get your attention. Assalamu alaikum. All right, great. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ta'ala wa sallam ala Sayyidina wa Habibina wa Mawlana Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم زين للناس حب الشهوات من النساء والبنين والقناطر المقنطرة من الذهب والفضة والخيل المسومة والأنعام والحرث ذلك متاع الحياة الدنيا والله عنده حسن الثواب. صدق الله العظيم. MashaAllah, it's such a big crowd. I thought half of you would have walked out by now given the delay in me arriving here, but MashaAllah, you're very patient. So Jazakumullah khairan, may Allah bless you. And may your patience manifest itself in all of the other important aspects of your life, inshallah ta'ala. So I've been asked to speak about what I think has been discussed all day long with parents in mind. So the first thing I've been doing is been looking at the crowd thinking how many parents are here, right? So there's a very, very strong mixture. So I'm going to speak about the subject in a manner that, inshallah, will hopefully engage everyone and be relevant to everybody. The first thing is, based on what I've been told, because I wasn't here, there's been a lot of discussion about the nafs today. Am I right? Yes, about the self. What exactly is it? Most ulama actually say that the nafs is the same as the soul, right? Although the way we discuss the nafs, it can come across as if it's something different. And some ulama do also have a theory that suggests that it's something different. But most ulama, who've commented on this, Imam Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah has a book on the soul, Kitab al-Ruh, Ibn Hajar Asqalani and others have commented on this. And generally the view is that the nafs and the soul are one and the same. And there are different ways in which it is discussed. And that one of the ways in which that it is differentiated is that when the soul is inside the body of the human being, it is often referred to as the nafs. When it is inside the body of the human being, it is referred to as the nafs, right? And then when discussing the soul inside the human being, it is spoken of as the person, right? So really when we speak about the nafs, we are speaking about you and I as people, as individual characters. Because as individual characters, our identities are usually made up of what we look like physically and so forth. But our true identity is really more endowed in something that's below the surface, that goes beyond physical characteristics, right? So physically, we're all unique in terms of our facial features, in terms of our height, in terms of the color of our skin, in terms of our fingerprints, right? Etc., etc., etc. All of the various ways in which human beings are individually identified, but that is just our physical identity that just reflects something inside, and that something inside is our soul or our nafs, if we go with the idea that it is one and the same thing. But then when we move towards the identity of the soul, right? So just like, if we were to look for something that was the equivalent of a fingerprint or of a facial feature or color of skin and things like that, the things that physically identify us, if we were to look for something, the equivalent of that in our soul, what would it be, right? And really when it comes to things that identify us in terms of our soul, we then start to think, we then go into the domain of things that are to do with our nature, our dispositions, our personalities, right? The exact configuration in each individual when it comes to anger and forbearance. The exact configuration, our identity, where on the scale are we in terms of generosity and in terms of miserliness? Where on on the scale we are exactly, the exact configuration of us in terms of something like our ability, our patience and impatience, where we are exactly on the scale in terms of kindness and harsh conduct, etc., etc. So just like your fingerprint, just like your facial characteristics, the positioning of your eyes, the shape of your eyebrows, the distance between your eyebrows and your hairline, the shape of your chin, and so on and so forth. These are the things that make us out, that identify us physically. Our soul is characterized really in terms of our personality, right? And that is a truer identity. That is a more meaningful identity of ourselves than the physical, right? Our physical body is nothing more than a tool, than an ala. It's a cage that carries our soul. It's a cage that carries our soul. What is inside is made up of things that are much, much more meaningful. So a person then can be identified as far as their soul is concerned by their spiritual nature, right? And their spiritual nature is ultimately defined by different aspects of their spiritual personality coming together to form an individual, right? And ultimately, as far as the soul or the nafs is concerned, its position in all of that is neutral. Its position in all of that is neutral. Often when we speak of the nafs, we speak of it negatively, right? People think of the nafs as the enemy within, etc., etc., etc. But really, if you think of the nafs as the soul, then it's neutral in the sense that it is what it is. It's you, right? It's you. You are good or bad to the measure. I am good or bad to the measure of good characteristics and bad characteristics. If my overall personality is good, then my soul is good, right? If my overall personality and the measure of good and bad, it leans towards the bad, towards the evil, then I am bad. And what matters here, of course, is the perspective of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What matters is how we are as that soul, as that person, as that nafs, right? In the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's important first and foremost to consider that. Now, when it comes to ourselves, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word nafs to refer to us both as individuals, right? As individuals, and also refers to the nafs in terms of the soul, and sometimes refers to the nafs in terms of dimensions of the nafs, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, and parents here are important, right? Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu qu anfusakum. So the word nafs is used. O people, save yourself. And this is the whole of you, right? The whole of you. So save yourself, as in you as a person. Qu anfusakum, yourself, wa ahlikum nara, and your families from the hellfire, right? وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةِ, the fuel of which, meaning that the hellfire burns on people, right? And stones, right? So that's one obligation towards the self, or the nafs, if you like, in the Quranic terminology, that we are to save it from the hellfire. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the self in terms of the soul, right? And there are different verses that can be used as an example. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that when we go to sleep, our soul or our self is suspended. Allah puts it to death, is the Quranic kind of word used for it. He says, Allahu yatawaffa al-anfusa hina mawtiha wallati lam tamut fi manamiha fayumsiku allati qada alayha al-mawta wa yursilu al-ukhra ila ajalin musamma. Allah is the one who gives death, who puts to death the souls when they die, right? And those that do not die, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them a taste of death when they go to sleep, right? And then the ones for whom death is predestined, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeps them asleep and they die in their sleep, right? And those for whom death isn't predestined, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets the soul awaken again. And so then you continue living another day, right? So we all taste a kind of death every time we go to sleep, right? So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to the nafs and speaks about it in terms of the nafs going to sleep and actually experiencing a kind of mini death. And then different aspects of the soul have been discussed. And I won't go into this too much detail because I'm sure it has been discussed. Different aspects of it have been discussed in the Quran in terms of an-nafsul ammara bis-su, an-nafsul lawwama, and an-nafsul mutma'inna. Right? There are three dimensions of the self. And really this discussion of the dimensions of the self are really three dimensions of our personalities. That every single one of us in our personality, right, there is a part of our conscience, and let's use the word conscience. There's a part of our conscience that kind of is attracted towards doing certain things that are on the left side, meaning they're things that are bad, right? On the path of right and good, or right and wrong, it is on the wrong path, right? So that's the one that's referred to as an-nafsul ammara bis-su, the part of the self that commands to do bad, right? Then there is the opposite of that, which is an-nafsul mutma'inna, the tranquil self, that part of the self that is pleased with good and therefore is happy and achieves tranquility and peace when it does good, right? Its way of finding enjoyment, finding fulfillment, finding peace is to do good and to be in good, right? And that's an-nafsul mutma'inna. And that's the soul that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will speak to and say, irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyah, go back to your Lord pleased with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fadkhuli fi ibadi, join my servants, wadkhuli jannati, and enter my paradise. That's the tranquil soul, the good soul, right? And then you have an-nafsul lawama, the one that does both, is in between, does good and bad, and when it does bad, it tells itself off. All right? It says, oh, you shouldn't have done that, that's really, really bad. What are you doing that for? There's constant loam or there's constant blaming of the self when it does bad. All of these things exist in us. They're all parts and parcel of our personality, right? And the things that ultimately that personality, when the pendulum swings towards the right and towards the wrong, the things that determine the right and wrong are the right and wrong given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But our personalities see these things in terms of our desires, right? So therefore, whenever we talk about the self, the thing that we always talk about at the same time is desires of the self, right? Desires of the soul, things that the nafs desires. Now, what's interesting here as well is that desires are generally spoken of badly. It's always negative, right? Desires are, they're bad, and so on and so forth. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. We can also say that desires are neutral. Just like the self, the nafs is pretty much neutral. It's the ruh, and it has the potential to do good and bad. Similarly, desires are also neutral. You have good desires and you have bad desires. The human being can get to the point where what he desires is good. His desires are in conformity with the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that those of you who are teenagers now, for you, your life struggle will be that you get to a point, you struggle with your desires, meaning with the good side of it and the bad side of it, with the objective that one day in your life, all of your desires will conform to the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that what you enjoy isn't something that you have to sneakily do at night on the side, right? I don't know, like a dodgy movie or a magazine or whatever it is, or a particular tune that mom or dad doesn't want you to listen to, or a group of friends that they don't want you to hang around with, etc., etc. You're all kind of sneaking off to fulfill those aspects of your desires. But really your ambition should be that one day your desires are in conformity with the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the way of the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so that what you enjoy is that which is in conformity. So your enjoyment, right, becomes that. So you enjoy, rather than enjoying reading trash, you enjoy a good book of knowledge, right? Rather than listening to some woman singing a pop song, ranting about nothing, and beats that don't even come together properly. It's just noise in your ears, right? You know, and you're kind of bouncing up and down like an idiot, right? Instead of finding enjoyment in those things, you find enjoyment in the tranquility of somebody's beautiful recitation of the Quran, or maybe a good nasheed, a good one, right? Maybe a halal one, maybe. Yeah. So, you know, and the idea is that sometimes desires are dictated by our surroundings, by our environment. So because people like something, something is popular, we want to do it. It's a fairly neutral situation. But ultimately, whether it's right or wrong, bad or good, is not determined by that culture, by that society, by the popularity of it. But it's determined, for us, it is determined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is the greatest blessing. And that's something that most people don't realize. You know, having a moral framework, having something that we can refer to that ultimately tells us what is right and wrong is one of the greatest blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Without it, there is confusion, right? Without it, I often say this, and I hope most people can understand this. Without it, what you have is constant social experimentation, right? So we live in an age of individualism, right? People say that this age is an age of individualism, right? It is a liberal age. Individualism in that people ultimately are interested in pursuing things for themselves, in finding some sort of self-identity, discovering themselves, but ultimately doing things for themselves. It's a selfish era. We live in a selfish era, right? And most of the ideas that shape the world around us are also selfish, right? Whether it's consumerism or capitalism, you know, these things are all about trying to amass as much wealth as possible, trying to consume as much as you can, trying to earn and make as much money as you can, right? Liberalism means that people should be able to do what, you know, pretty much that everything goes, right? And there's a particular ethical principle that basically tells people that everything goes as long as you don't harm anyone. But the idea of what is harmful and what is not, what's wrong with a particular pop song, right? How is it harmful? Or what's wrong with you know, forgive me if there are some people who are, no, maybe I won't say that. Some people are too young. All right? But what's wrong with, you know, what's wrong with certain images and certain pictures, right? Yeah? What's wrong with an inappropriately dressed woman on a billboard? Right? What's wrong with this and what's wrong with that? And often the question is, what's wrong with it? What harm? And when people say what's wrong with it, the question they're asking is, what's so harmful about it? What's the harm in it? That's the question they're asking, right? And the answer usually is, well, it's not harming anybody. But what they're really saying is, it isn't harming anybody directly, right? Meaning that that inappropriately dressed woman, and unfortunately for some reason it's usually women, by the way. Not sure what that says about society. I'll leave that for you all to think about. It's usually women. The men are always dressed, right? You know, New Year's Eve, if you saw people going out to a party, you'll see men. Everybody's like this, but the men are like this, cold but warmly dressed. And the women are also like this, cold but skin is bared, and they're like, and you're thinking to yourself, what exactly is going on here? Right? Why is it okay for the men to be fully dressed in like warm clothes and so on and so forth, and the women have to be half undressed in the freezing cold of December the 31st or January the 1st, whichever side of midnight? Why is that okay? But it's okay. It's okay, right? Because it's individualism, it's liberty, people have the freedom to do what's it harming, etc. So the question always is, well, who's it harming? What's it harming? And the answer to that is, well, the thing is, harm is always measured based on direct harm, right? So that somebody walking around in a miniskirt isn't giving another person a black eye, is it? It's doing other things to their eyes, but it's not giving them a black eye, right? Or, you know, it's not breaking their arm or harming them in any way, and so on and so forth. But who said that that's the only way in which it can harm someone? And that's the point. The point is, we don't know. This is the issue, right? So you're all guinea pigs. You're all guinea pigs in a massive social lab, right? Which is London, in your case, Slough, right? Where basically all of this stuff is being tried out on us that has never been done before. That has never been done before. And the thing about social experimentation, when you experiment something on people through imagery, through a new social order, through a new lifestyle, a new way of living, the results aren't immediate, right? If somebody attacks a person, smacks them on the face, the results are immediate. They're going to get swollen up, get a black eye, bleed. The results are immediate, right? If there's a war, right, some people are going to get killed, others are going to get maimed, injured, there's going to be prisoners, there's going to be damage to the economy, etc. The result is immediate. But when it comes to things like choosing to try out a new culture or a new give up old customs and norms, right? So before people had more modesty. Well, modesty is not important because being immodest doesn't harm anybody. When you try out something like that, the effect of it is unknown, and nobody knows how long it will take for the effect to show. So for example, when a young person gets into the habit of looking at too many bad pictures, right? You know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about, right? The older lot, you know what I'm talking about, right? He might think, well, it's not doing anything to me, you know, it's a bit of pleasure, a bit of fun, etc., etc., etc. It might turn into an addiction, and so it's not harming anybody else. But you know what? You have absolutely no idea how it's going to affect you in 20 years' time, in 30 years' time, and more importantly, how it will affect society as a whole, right? So actually, nobody has answers. Everybody's just trying things. And they're trying things based on their own shahwa. They're trying things based on their own shahwa, based on their desires, because we want to. We want to do this, and we want to be able to do it, right? And we don't want anyone to be able to stop us. Hence, you know, liberalism, right? Liberty, freedom, etc., etc., etc. And so people do it. Well, how does it affect us? Well, it's never been done like this before, so really nobody knows, right? So this basically is confusion. And in that confusion, you and I have been chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be Muslims, right? And for us, we have our Creator telling us, this is right, this is wrong, right? And when something is wrong and I tell you not to do it, just accept it, it's harmful, right? Whether you understand it right now or not, we still stay away from it because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam told us that it is harmful. And for young people, usually the person that's telling you in your face about that is your mum and dad. It's usually mum and dad, older brother, older sister. They're the one that's telling you, right? But they're telling you because of the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited, right? And in your mind, you might be thinking, oh, you know, is it really harmful? What's wrong with it, etc., etc., etc. Well, there is something wrong with it. And just because people around us are doing it, just because we live in a society where these things are allowed, it doesn't mean it's not harmful. That's the most important thing. Because as young people sometimes, I don't know, young lad over there, young lad over here, Allah says, you know, that zina is prohibited and therefore you can't have a girlfriend or a girl can't have a boyfriend, boys and girls can't hang around together. And you're thinking to yourself, yeah, but you know, but non-Muslims can do it and it's fine for them. And maybe you're thinking in your mind, well, what's the harm in that, right? Well, the first and foremost, the harm is in the fact that Allah prohibited it. But then our faith, we believe that if Allah prohibited it, then He prohibited it also because it's actually harmful to us. Harmful to us individually in some way or other, or harmful to us collectively. Either harmful to us in the short term or harmful to us in the longer term. That means that something will happen to society in the long term. In the long term, that society will regret, and it will be because of the fact they've allowed zina and things like that. They've lost the regulation provided by the institution of marriage, etc., etc., etc. Right? So I think now more than 50% of babies are born outside of marriage in this country. What's the harm of that? Well, nobody's dying from it, etc., etc., etc. Well, these things, their harm don't necessarily manifest immediately. But also the harm changes from one place to another. So it's less harmful in one place Because the harm is there, but they have the money and the institutions to regulate and manage the harm. Right? So single mothers, as a result of the institution of marriage breaking up, you have lots of single mothers, but then he in this country is wealthy enough or has a background in, as a welfare state, so he's able to provide some support for those single mothers, and therefore, although the harm is there, it's controlled, right? But that doesn't mean that the rest of the world will be able to control it. So what happens to a single mom in Africa, right? Where maybe the country isn't as prosperous and there's no welfare state. What happens when the institution breaks down over there? Right? Can people in Bangladesh subscribe to the same values of liberty that are in this country, because of the fact that in this country it doesn't appear to be so harmful because there's a welfare state and so on and so forth that picks up the pieces? Well, there's no welfare state over there. What's going to happen over there? Just because there's no massive AIDS problem here doesn't mean that the problem of sexual diseases and things like that spreading among people isn't a massive issue. Yes, in this country, maybe the health system and the NHS keeps it under control. That's not what's happening in Africa. Millions of people are dying over there because of these things. Millions of people. You young people don't know this, right? I once sat with somebody from Zimbabwe who told me that there are predictions in Africa. This was in 2003 when I was in Hajj, right? And I met this man in Hajj, and he said, there are predictions in Africa that 1/3 of the population will die, right? Because of these diseases. And there's a narration actually transmitted by Imam Malik, I believe, right, that says that when obscene acts, when obscenity spreads in a people, Allah afflicts those people with diseases that they have never seen before, that they have no cure for. Like AIDS, for example. Right? So what exactly is the harm? Well, you know what? Sometimes the harm manifests over time. We're lucky that we have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us what that harm is. Now, a few words. When we speak about desires, there is something that is said often about Islam, that Islam is a religion of nature and a religion of balance. As far as desires are concerned, this balance and this natural deen of ours, right, gives human beings the opportunity to enjoy desires that are part of their nature. So human beings, for example, their desires, if you take the Quranic narrative, their desires usually are, all right, so firstly, men desiring women, women desiring men, and the bit that happens in between, right? So that's one of our desires. Like it or lump it, that's what happens, right? When it comes to, as young people grow up, right, what do they want? The second desire is wealth, the second big desire. And some say that these are the two big desires that human beings have. Among their shahwat, they want wealth, right? And they want to enjoy the company of the opposite gender, right? So for men, women, and for women, men, right? And these are their big desires. Now, when it comes to these desires, sometimes everything else kind of feeds off of that, right? As young people grow up in school and so on and so forth, what is the main, as they become teenagers, what are the main things that they're talking about? They're talking about either mal, and by mal isn't just money, remember, mal or wealth is possessions, right? Young people, what are you guys talking about in school? You'll know if you're not doing it, mashallah. I'm sure Muslim youngsters don't do that at all. No, never. Right? Astaghfirullah. Muslim young, how can you guys don't do it? But you see it done, right? Yeah? Inshallah. Yeah? You see it, don't you? Youngsters. Right. Some of you maybe even attend this school. So you see in this school, what are people talking? They're talking about what they possess, what they own, what have they got? The PlayStation, their latest tablet, the latest phone, how much money they have, how much pocket money. Sometimes they're boasting about dad's money and mum's money, right? And things like that. And the other one is girls and boys. Girls and boys, right? And Islam acknowledges this. Islam acknowledges that there is a natural desire in people to attain wealth, right? And to desire men, and men desiring women, women desiring men. So Islam doesn't say you can't do that. Islam doesn't prohibit it completely and say you can't have money. Or no, men can't enjoy women and women can't enjoy men. It doesn't do that. It just regulates it. It just controls it so that you don't end up with a society where everything is messed up, right? You don't end up with exploitation. So there's a reason why Allah prohibits zina, right? But prohibiting zina isn't prohibiting a woman to a man and a man to a woman. But it's just regulating it, meaning that, hang on, you want to enjoy one another's company, you got to get married. Now, parents, when it comes to this particular shahwa, of course, our responsibility is to protect our children, right? From allowing themselves to fall into zina and fall into fulfilling their shahwa or their desire in an impermissible way. But it's also the responsibility of parents to make sure that they don't impose barriers that makes that more difficult. So there is a natural desire in a young person as they go into their mid and late teens and into their 20s that they desire, a boy desires female company, a girl desires male company. They need to get married and so on and so forth, and parents are, no, beta, Betty, you know, you have to finish your degree, or you have to finish your medical course, right? Or you got to become an engineer. You have to have a job, right? Or something or other. If they need a job before they get married, what are you there for, mommy and daddy? What are you there for? Right? Your responsibility doesn't suddenly kind of, it's not limited to them getting a job. Right? Your responsibility is to make sure that they're able to protect themselves from their desires. That means that if marriage is a necessity, we make it happen. Parents make it happen. If my son needs to get married at the age of whatever, right? I don't know, 18, 19, let's just say. As young as that, right? Which was normal, even for people who were young in the 50s and 60s. Getting married at 17, 18, 19, 20 was normal. I have a classmate who got married at 16. I have a classmate who got married at 16. It was no big deal. He had children by the time he was 18. Perfectly good guy, healthy guy. He's perfectly fine, right? Although he's got a son that looks like him, you know, literally, because he's young and his sons, they kind of look alike. Anyway, but the point is that's perfectly normal. Now we've started these bid'at of you got to finish your degree before you get married, and we're doing that to boys and we're doing that to girls. Oh, you got to get a job before you get married. You got to have an income, etc., etc. You know what? Islamically, it's nonsense. And that's when we are forcing our children to fall into their desires, right? So, on the one hand, we have to help them control their desires. But at the same time, the outlet that the Sharia has given, the outlet that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given, we have to let them have that outlet. And that means that sometimes what happens is the whole culture has to change for all of us, for us to be able to individually make it happen, right? Because if fathers start looking for wives for their sons at a younger age, that means other fathers and mothers have to be willing to allow their daughters to get married at a young age, right? Of course, within legal bounds. Yes? So if there isn't a social change, then it doesn't work out. If there isn't a social change, everybody begins to accept this because they've talked about it and they understand that this is a necessity, then things don't change. And you know what? Because we're not willing to change, this is what then happens. Parents, this is what they do. Eventually parents, because they're not willing to budge on this unfounded, baseless principle that, oh, they have to finish their studies and they have to have a job. What happens then is the inevitable consequence of this is that parents turn a blind eye to zina. When their children turn to zina, especially when boys do it, right? Especially when boys do it, parents turn a blind eye. When girls do it, beizati, blah, 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 blah. All of this other stuff comes in. For some reason, it's different. It's the same. It's the same, right? But ultimately, we turn a blind eye because we have these bigger principles, bigger values of finishing a university education and getting a job that we've invented that have nothing to do with Islam. And all of a sudden, when people are doing haram and going against Islam, we tolerate it. We tolerate it for the sake of these other values that have become important to us, regardless of the hukum of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So that's one aspect. Second is the desire for wealth. How do parents manage the desire of wealth in their children? It's there. Your 13-year-old and 14-year-old is at school talking and bragging about his possessions, and if he doesn't have more possessions than the other kid, he's depressed about it. Believe it or not, that's what's happening. Right? He might not come home and cry to you and say, oh, you know, I'm having a hard time in school because everybody else has an iPad, but I don't. Right? Because mom or dad, you're too strict. He might not come and tell you about it, but it's happening. Right? He's going through this emotional turmoil because of this competition for wealth, for possessions that exists in school as young as 10, 11, 12, of course, and onwards, right? How do you manage that? How do you manage that? Well, first and foremost, it helps if us as a community, we don't become materialistic. So every time Beta and Betty asks for something, we're giving it. Because, you know, when I was young, I didn't get what I wanted. I want my son and my daughter to have whatever they want. What a load of nonsense. All right? Well, you're basically destroying them. You're destroying your son and if you give them whatever they want, you're destroying them. Imam al-Ghazali, in his advice about the upbringing of children, he actually advises that parents should bring up their children in simplicity. That even when they have wealth, even when parents have wealth and have money, they're rich, right? They should get their children used to not always getting what they want. They should get them used to simple living. At the same time, there needs to be some balance, right? So, you know, our children shouldn't look like paupers while everybody else dresses better, right? You know, we should make sure that our children look good, look smart, etc., etc. But we should not allow them to become materialistic because we are hell-bent on making sure every single thing that they want, they get, right? Parents from a young age have to get into the habit of not just saying no. You need to get into the habit of saying no to your children when it comes to things that they want. But that's not enough. You have to be able to say no to your children as well as help them learn to accept that no. It doesn't stop just at no. It's really bad when children ask something from their parents and parents say, nay, no, or na in Bengali, right? Or la in Arabic. Okay, whatever it is, your language is, basically that's called fobbing somebody off, right? You just fob them off. No, get out, no, right? You can't have that. You keep asking for things. No, we have to be able to justify it. We've got to justify. We've got to say no, and then we've got to justify. We've got to justify. We've got to make them understand that you can't just go after having possessions. You can't just have a room full of toys, right? And when they do, you know, when the toys accumulate, and the room and the cupboards start to fill up and so on and so forth, we've got to get them into the habit of giving things away. Giving things away. Giving up some of their toys to the poor. And every now and then, giving up something that they love. لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. Children have to be taught this. You will not attain piety until you spend from that which you love, and children have to learn this from a young age. Every now and then, they've got to sacrifice something that they really, really want, something that they really, really desire, because it's for their piety. And parents have to explain to them that this is good for you. That it's good for you to sometimes give away something that you really, really like. So sometimes you got to observe your children. In about a week's time, you're going to give away some toys to a charity, right? There'll be loads of toys that you young people that you don't want. So you're going to be happy to give them away. And then there's going to be another bunch of toys. I'm using the example of toys, right? With the younger kids, but with older kids, there's going to be other things. You know, phones and tablets and whatever it is that you guys are into, man. All right? There's going to be loads of stuff that they're going to want, right? They're going to want to keep. Maybe they don't even play with it much. We've got to educate them so that every time we're giving things away, they're able to give away a few things that they actually want to keep. They actually want to keep as a way of learning to give up things that they love for the sake of others, right? And I have a talk that I give on living for others. In an age of individualism, we have to educate our children in how to live for others. My parents' generation, right? And anybody who's my age, you know, too old, but if you're my age, then you'll remember this about your parents, right? You know, they rarely lived for themselves. They rarely lived for themselves. There isn't much that I can remember in my parents' life where they did things purely for their own enjoyment, right? Most of what they did was for somebody else. Most of the money they earned went either towards their children or for the poor or supporting family back home or something or other. Not much of it was saved. Not much of it was materialistically enjoyed. They were early immigrants in this country. Things were hard. But you know what? It was good for them. It was good for them. It kept them grounded. All right? They didn't live much for themselves. Much of their life was lived for others. And my children, right? I have an 11-year-old and a 5-year-old. My children, it scares me when I see how much of their lives is purely immersed in themselves, in their own pleasure, not willing to share, not willing to give and so forth. Naturally, because they have more. Because I can give them more than my parents gave me. And this is the danger. When you have more, you begin to love what you have. And when you love what you have, you don't want to share it. And that's what our children begin to develop. They begin to develop a love for their wealth. So they want to keep things even though they don't need it. Even though they don't need it. They want to buy things even though they don't need it. Consumerism. They buy into consumerism. All of us need to watch this carefully. And youngsters who understand what I'm saying, I'm sorry if it's going over the top of your head because I'm meant to be talking to the parents. But anyway, if you understand what I'm saying, then you need to think about this for yourself as well. You can't always just go after things just because you want it. Just because you want it. Because your success lies not in fulfilling your desires. Your success lies in fulfilling what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from you and working, striving to make life better for others, to make the world better for others. And eventually what will happen is you will enjoy that. You will begin to enjoy giving something away more than having something. You'll get more pleasure out of seeing a poor person eat than enjoying your own food. Right? You'll get more pleasure out of seeing someone else having fun than even yourself having fun. You'll begin to develop that quality of living for yourself. The Prophet ﷺ lived for other people, right? And he taught, Allahu fi awni al-abd, ma kana al-abdu fi awni akhi. Allah is there to help his servant as long as the servant is there to help his brother. Right? Man kana fi hajati akhihi, kana Allahu fi hajati. The Prophet ﷺ taught, whoever is there for the needs of his brother, Allah is there for his need. Even in dua, even in something like dua, our Prophet taught that when a Muslim prays for another Muslim behind his back, there is an angel whose job is to say, Ameen, may you have the same. And what does Ameen mean? What does Ameen mean? Anyone know? Youngsters. Any of the youngsters? Young lads. Anyone know what Ameen means? Yes, Allah accept the dua, right? Ameen means Allah accept the dua. So the angel says, Ameen, Allah accept his dua and may he have the same. So if you said, oh Allah, make cure this person of ill health. The angel prays for you and says, may Allah accept your dua and may you have the same. That means you're then protected from illness yourself. So we're constantly taught to do things for other people. Responsibility, accountability. One of the big problems that I've noticed, right, in many parents is not teaching their children responsibility. And of course, both of the things that I've said so far about relationships and about wealth, right, is also to do with responsibility. But more specifically, we don't teach responsibility because we do too much for our children. And I mean that in a very specific way. When I say I do too much, we do too much and for too long. And parents have begun to develop this culture whereby we think that it's good to do like almost everything for our children and not get them involved in doing things, right? You know, kids nowadays, right, they don't know how to do the basic manual tasks. The basic manual tasks, right? Nowadays, if I ask the average 17, 18, 19-year-old, you know, if they're volunteering or something like that, say in our organization they're volunteering, right? They can't use a screwdriver. Can't use a screwdriver. Don't know how to saw a piece of wood. Something as simple as that. Can't aim and hit a nail, right, straight on the head with a hammer. It's like missing all over the place and getting bent and falling off, right, and stuff like that. You ask them to cut a piece of wood, they probably cut their arm off, all right, and you're going to get done for health and safety, right? They don't know how to use their hands. The only thing they can do with their hands is like press buttons, all right, either like this or like that. Right, you know, joy pads and so on, right? Or a keypad. But that's about it. They don't know how to use their hands. There's no coordination. It's shocking. I came across this 25, 26-year-old recently, right? You know, and we're painting a wall together. And I couldn't believe that he couldn't paint. I was like, you can't paint? And he's like, no, I've never done this before. And I was like, oh, Allah. How can you not know how to paint? How can you not have painted before? Because mum and dad always get the painters in. All right? Always do it themselves. While son sleeps it off on a Saturday or a Sunday morning. All right? Why aren't they getting involved? All right? Why is it that there are so many parents who send money to relatives back home, but their children don't know who those relatives are? Are you laughing because it's true? All right, good. All right, because I don't want to be completely off the mark. Children don't know who the relatives are. There's like mum's cousin, first cousin, second cousin, whatever, twice, 3 times, 500 times removed. Whatever it is. But mum's spending money on them. She's sending money back home for this cousin of hers, right? Because she's having an operation. Daughter doesn't know, son doesn't know. They don't care. And you know what? That woman or man who they're helping, their cousin, their children are still related to your children. So they're going to need to know them. And if they're poor, then they have more right to your children's money than a Muslim aid appeal or an Islamic relief appeal. Those relatives, even though for your children they're one step distant, right? But those relatives have more right to your children's money than Muslim aid, Islamic relief, Islamic help, or Ummah Welfare Trust, or whoever it is. I have nothing against these charities, I support them. But it has to start with relatives, right? Well, how are they going to know who their poor relatives are back home if you've never introduced them? If they never know that you're helping them and so on and so forth. I know parents who are on their deathbeds and their children know nothing about what they own, right, in other countries, right, especially back home. They don't know nothing about who their relatives are. Nothing, absolutely nothing. All right? And here, it's not just a loss of connections. It isn't just a loss of connections, but it's a loss of a culture of networking. You know, my father's generation, the number of people they knew off the top of their heads. So-and-so is so-and-so's son, so-and-so's daughter, and they're related to so-and-so, and they live in this town and this city, and this is where they're from back home. Right? And this is what their family is like, and this is what they do, and this is what their ancestors are about. They knew all of this stuff off the top of their heads. Our children, I don't even know half of it. And I take an interest, right? I have a book with, like, you know, all of the, about 4 or 5 generations of my family's history and all of the various trees, right? I've gone to family elders and written it all down. But I'm one of the only person I know of my generation who's done that. Right? And I still don't know as much as my father does and my mum, they do off the top of their heads. I have to go look at that book. I have to like run to the bookshop, get the book out. I'm like, oh, it's this cousin. They're from this branch of the family and so on. Right? And I had to stay up like until 3 a.m. in the morning one night with a family elder, right, who's, rahimahullah, passed away now. Wallahi, he knew all of those names off by heart. Right? Our young people don't know this stuff. That's a loss. We're losing something. It's not related to nafs and shahawat and stuff. It's a bit of a tangent. But I'd like to talk about this. As we move, we're in a new year, right? We're in a new year. As we move forward, right, there are things that being in this country and in this culture that we gain that are positive. There are things that we gain that are positive. Education, maybe order, I don't know, discipline, whatever it is, wealth, etc. But there's a lot that we lose. There's a lot that we are losing. And parents have to identify what those losses are, and they have to mitigate. They have to find ways of minimizing those losses. Whether they are cultural losses, whether they are religious losses, then you need to mitigate them. Because those are children, just like the harm of those pictures on the billboards, right? We don't know what they are. Similarly, some of these cultural things that our children are losing now, given that they're here, if we don't pass them on, we don't know how it's going to harm them in the future. We don't know how it is going to harm them in the future, because these are old school things. Not old school because mom and children. These things aren't old school because mom and dad does them. They're old school because they have been happening for thousands of years. This is how it has been for thousands of years. And suddenly with your generation it's going to get lost. That's a disaster. That is a disaster. And we have to make sure we stop and change. How much time are you guys giving me? Is it like, can I just carry on? Okay, about 10 minutes. I might as well open this, right, since I've got it. Right. Let me quickly go through some other things that are to do with shahawat. Because ultimately, when it comes to the nafs, the things that we need to talk about are the shahawat of the nafs, right? Now, the other thing that people desire, that people have shahwa for, right, are children, right? Now, here's the interesting twist in this. Like, elder generations understand, they value like for them, the desire to have children is all about quantity, right? So it's like, it's about having lots of children. So our elders, like my family is 7 brothers and sisters, right? 7 brothers and sisters, and you know and everyone of that generation, like of my father's generation, that's usually the size of the family. 5, 6, 7, 8 children, sometimes 10, 12 children. All right? And that's normal. They've lived with it, mashallah. They've managed to bring their children up, and it's fine. It's fine, right? Now, there are 2, you know, remember I said that desires are neutral. They can be good or they can be bad. When people desire children for worldly reasons, then that desire becomes a bad desire. But when they desire them for the akhirah, right, then it becomes a good desire. But ultimately, children are a test, right? أَمْوَالُكُمْ وَأَوْلَادُكُمْ فِتْنَةٌ, right? Your wealth and your children are a test, right? Meaning that if you can pass that test by bringing up your children according to Islam and put them on the path to success in the akhirah, then you've passed that test. Otherwise, you failed that test. Your children have become a test for you, who will eventually drag you into the hellfire in Qiyamah, right? But in terms of our responsibilities to children, the positive aspect of the desire for children, we have to pass on to our children. We have to pass on to our children. You know, for any society to continue, they say that the ratio of children has to be 2.1. The average ratio for any society to continue, that society, the number of children they have has to hit 2.1 on average in order for the society to continue in a healthy manner, right? If it's less than that, it's unhealthy. They're going to suffer problems later on, right? It's a statistical thing, okay? In Europe, most societies are below 2.1, all right? And of course, in Muslim countries, most Muslims are, mashallah, way above 2.1. And that's really, really good. The problem is that in these societies, Muslims slowly begin to think that it's somehow good to have less children. It's somehow good to have less children. And they balance it, they like, oh, there's jobs and careers and money, and you know how we got to bring them up properly and so on and so on. Well, your mum and dad did a fine and dandy job. What's your problem? Right? We start making excuses to have less and less and less children, and then eventually what will happen is the Muslim community, number of children, average children in the Muslim community will become the same as everybody else, right? That would be a travesty. That's something that parents have to pass on to their children. And you know what? Of course, your chances automatically dwindle the moment you start to get married at 27, 28, 29, 30, 35. If you're getting married at that age, you don't hardly have a chance to have 4 or 5 children, do you? It's not going to happen, right? And that's a loss. That's a failing in the tarbiyah of children. So that is a positive aspect of shahwa. Like the shahwa for children, that is positive. It's for the akhirah. It's for the strength of the ummah. It's for the Prophet ﷺ to boast about on qiyamah. Because on the day of judgment, the Prophet ﷺ said that he will boast because of the number of his ummah. Right? He told men, marry women that will have lots of children, because I will boast about your numbers on the day of judgment. فَإِنِّي مُكَاثِرٌ بِكُمُ الْأُمَمِ. Right? Nowadays, it's like we're delaying it so much that there's hardly even any room, you know, in the number of years left to be able to have more than 2 or 3 children. Now, it's not good enough that we just accept Western values to the point that even something as basic as having children, right? And valuing having children, the continuation of human society and Islamic society is an acceptable compromise. Why? Because of the love for wealth. Because of the love for wealth. Because, oh, you know, I've got to make more money. Got to have a job, got to have a career, etc., etc. And with that comes the other desire, which is desire for status. So, you know, a career. What's a career about? It's about money and it's about status, right? And sometimes the career is the reason why women want to put off having children, or men want to put off having children, or men want to have children and women want to put it off because, oh, you know, I need a few more years in my career. I can't take a break now. I can't take maternity now because then, you know, I'm not going to get the promotion, right? And these kind of things happen. But these things happen because of values instilled in them, or values not instilled in them, in us, when we were children. Because the value of family, of community, right? Those kind of values weren't instilled in us. We don't think of them as valuable. For us, money, career is more valuable. It's a competition of values. Because of that, we allow these things to happen. And if that did continue to happen, that would be a travesty. And you know what? I'll tell you another travesty. Muslim men and women, the Muslim community beginning to think that being a mother at home is somehow a bad thing. Right? When the Muslim community starts to think like that, we are facing disaster. We are facing disaster, and it's happening. There's young brothers and sisters, amongst sisters. You know, sometimes sisters, you're your own worst enemies. And forgive me, I don't mean any offense by that, right? Because what happens is, a lot of the talking is among yourselves, right? So what's happening is like, the career-minded women are like, you know, oh, so sister, what do you do? Oh, you know, I'm at home looking after my children. Oh, alhamdulillah, you know, I'm head of department in this particular company, right? And it's said in this tone deliberately to make this amazing woman who is at home looking after children, right, to make her feel somehow inadequate and small, like she should say sorry because she's a mum. No, it's the other way around. You should say sorry. You should say sorry because you're not a mum. Because you're delaying that. Because the one thing that you would actually take fulfillment from, right? You're allowing that to be compromised by what? By what exactly? Hubbul mal and hubbul jah. Love of wealth and love of status. Right? Because neither of those things are intrinsically valuable. Unless the career is somehow valuable in itself because it's, I don't know, it's somehow related to Islam or community and so on and so forth, right? But usually people who go into careers for that reason aren't obnoxious in their attitude, all right? And won't look down on people who are carrying society forward, who are bringing up the next generation of human beings, who probably have the toughest job on earth, All right? Usually career women only realize it when they eventually have children and they realize, oh, you know what? And smart career women give it up to have children. All right? And I'm not putting careers down, right? You know, I run an institution that makes a big deal about the education of women, but it's about putting things into perspective. But it concerns me now that in the Muslim community, and this is a question of tarbiyah, parents, these are the things that you've got to look out for, because we set the trend and the culture for tomorrow, right? What's happening is there is this thing of job comes first, career comes first, children aren't that important, times have changed. Times have changed, you know. It's not like how it was in our parents' generation. Yes, it is. It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. Nothing has changed. And whatever's changed usually is bad. It's usually bad. What's changed? All right? Money is not our objective in life. Money is about putting food on the table. Once you've got food on the table, khalas, that's enough. There are bigger things to do in life, like please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Like bring up the next generation of human beings and be mothers and fathers, right? And do a good job with them so that the ummah is already developing just because we're better parents. For no other reason. Not because we have great institutions, not because our masjids are wonderful, which they're not, right? Because they don't have space for youngsters, usually, and for women, often, right? Which is a travesty. Now, not because of all of those things, but just because we've got the family unit right. We value having families and we do a good job of them. Next generation is sorted. All right? But we don't get that. Forget that. We're beginning to devalue even having families. All right? Family life is devalued. It's good to hang about, you know, at work, chatting about nothing and nonsense. Like what soap you saw yesterday and like what the targets are and stuff like that at work around the photocopier. That's more valuable than enjoying bringing up children. Come on, what is wrong with us? All right? It's all messed up in here. All right? Seriously, these are things. And you know, children, they're not gonna have any clear perspective about family life later on if family life isn't enjoyable. This is my final point. If family life isn't enjoyable now as a member of a family, as a young member of a family, right? You've got a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8, 10-year-old, 11, 12, 13-year-old, and life at home is boring. It's boring. Mum's yeah on the phone. All right? Dad is, I don't know, blah, blah, somewhere else, right? Or he's not at home. Yes? You want to have a bit of fun? Lock up in your room, watch a bit of TV, watch some stupid video that you're not meant to watch on YouTube, or play a game. What kind of life is that? You know what? If that's all you do, you're sad. Seriously. If that's all you do, you're sad. You need to get a life, bro. Or sis. You need to get a life. Seriously, you've got no life. If all you do is like, you know, WhatsApp, Facebook and stuff like that. Oh, you know, I just got this score in this game. Facebook post. Who cares? Who cares? You got a score in a game. Come on. You got nothing better to say? Seriously, you know, the most complex thing on earth is your brain. Right? It is the most sophisticated piece of equipment, right, that exists on earth. Right? In the universe, possibly. Right? You possess that. And all you can produce from it is your last high score. That's all your brain can produce. What are you doing? All right? Or like, oh, I checked this out on Amazon. Check out these shoes on Facebook. Are you serious? That's like, that's our life. Talking about what's the next thing we're going to buy, what we found shopping, going through some catalog, right? Looking at clothing or something or other. That's consumerism. This is it. We're buying into it, right? We need to resist this. And you know what? It's inevitable that will happen to children if parents don't care about having something to do. If there's no activity that's enjoyable for children that the family do together, then obviously that's what kids are going to do. And sometimes we're setting it up. You know, it's like an unspoken relief that there's computer games. It's like unspoken relief. Oh, great. You know, I don't have to keep telling them off. They're like nice and quiet now. right? There are so many kids that get brought up by the TV. You know, TV is mum and dad, right? Or they're crying, switch on the TV, plonk them there, so mum can go and cook. That's not how tarbiyah is done, right? You've got to spend time together, yeah? And this brings me to my next point, which is that one of the other natural desires that people have is the desire for enjoyment. It's the desire to enjoy things, right? And that's why children play computer games, they go out and they play football, etc., etc. Parents have got to work out in their minds that what aspects of enjoyment are halal, permissible, healthy, useful, constructive, right? And I'm going to get involved in them. Have I gone past those? Something? All right. Somebody's like telling me, you need to shut up. It's going on for too long. Okay. So I was talking about now. So that enjoyment, the need to enjoy a game or so, or some free time, etc., is there, right? But if children are left to do that on their own, if they have to make up how they're going to enjoy themselves, right? And they never get to, they never even come to know that there is some way of legitimately enjoying themselves, then they are ultimately going to get into the habit of doing things that are haram. Right? And you know, and this is true especially among parents who are practicing and who value the deen and so on and so forth, right? Honestly, man, we have this problem, like we think somehow any enjoyment is bad. So it's like, oh, my son's gone off, he's playing football, astaghfirullah. You know? Or he's gone to the gym, it's like there's a silent astaghfirullah in there somewhere. Right? Not everything our kids do is bad. Right? In fact, some of it is good and we should be doing it with them. Right? And when we don't do it with them, then they naturally think there's nothing to enjoy with mum and dad. And since there's nothing to enjoy with mum and dad, I'll go enjoy it with someone else, right? And one of the great things that I had made a mental note that I wasn't going to speak about myself too much in this talk, but whenever I talk about family, I end up talking about my own experiences, right? One of the great things, so I'm going to break the rules, I'm going to just say, I'm not boasting. But one of the great things that my dad used to do, we never had a TV at home, right? When we were growing up, there was no TV at home. So one of the things that my dad used to do is that he'd create excuses for like my friends to want to come to our house and enjoy something else, something different, a game, right? I don't know, snooker or pool, or we used to play this game called carom board, right? It's popular in Bangladesh, right? And you know, and other games. And the idea was that it's obvious, like kids go to each other's houses and they watch TV, they watch cartoons and it's movies and things like that. They go to each other's house, and he didn't want kids to think that there was nothing for my friends to come and do at my place. So we were constantly getting through one game after another game after another game. They're usually quite physical. So what he would do is, when a game required a lot of space, he'd empty out a room in the house, right? So that me and my friends could get together and we'd have a games room, right? Where we could all play together, right? And make all the noise that we wanted. Mum never used to always like it, because she's like, oh, you're making too much noise. And Dad would be like, let them. But it's great, you know, it was great that it's a really, really fond memory, right? For me, you know, of my childhood, right? Another thing that's important is that parents need to know who their children's friends are. I know kids, you're going to hate me for saying that, right? But parents need to know who their kids' friends are. And you need to create social reasons, not tell me who your friends are. All right, okay, Abdullah, Abdul Samad, Amin. Amina? Why'd you have a friend called Amina? Well, you know what I mean. You know, not taking a list of them, but creating reasons why they would engage with their friends around you. Right? Around you. And so often what happens is that kids have friends, they have a group of friends in school, group of friends outside of school, and so on and so forth. Parents don't know who their friends are. Right? If you don't know who their friends are, then the most important thing that shapes a person, you have no control over, you have no say in, you have no knowledge of and understanding of, and that is company. Company shapes a person. If a child has good company, they're going to do all right. Right? Whether parents did a good job with them or not, just because they have a good group of friends, they're going to do all right. Right? But if they have a bad group of friends, you know, the parents can be great scholars, brilliant kind of Muslims, spend all their night in tahajjud, but because the children have bad company, things are going to be bad. Things are going to be a mess. Because their company, al-mar'u ala dini khalili, right? A man is on the religion of his friend. Because ultimately that is a more powerful influence on your child's life than anything else, right? And they're fulfilling their desires over there, and you have absolutely no idea what makes that group of friends tick. What do they collectively enjoy, right? And you know what? If they enjoy things, you know, that are legitimate, like they enjoy football, say boys, right? Girls, you know, whatever you guys do, right? I'm a boy, so I know what the boys do, right? Well, at least. Do you guys still play football? Yeah? All right. Yeah, because in my area, all the football fields are kind of empty, which is kind of sad. Because I remember 8, 9, 10, I started playing a lot of football, right? And you know, it was difficult to find somewhere to play when we were kids. And there were more places. Now, like, you know, there's housing developments everywhere. Little football pitches are being cleared up for housing development. So there's less space now. But even then, they're empty. Right? They're empty. Nobody does anything physical because everyone's at home playing computer games, right? So there's problems of obesity in children, poor health, etc., etc. You know, in another few years' time, we're going to have young people in their teens suffering from repetitive strain syndromes. You're going to end up with kids with thumb injuries and finger injuries because of the amount of time they're spending on their games, on their phones, typing and things like that. Whereas repetitive strain syndrome was something that people got in their working life, like in their late 20s and in their 30s because they were typing too much. Soon you're going to end up with teenagers getting it because they're spending too much time on computer games. And those are bad injuries. Like if a kid played football and broke his leg, it's not so bad. They'll heal very, very quickly. But the repetitive stuff basically is like old age too early, because that's supposed to happen in old age, right? That's supposed to happen because you've been doing something for so long. But what's happening is you've done a lifetime's worth of pressing in 5 years, right? So you're suffering the injury of that. That's old age. That's a 11, 12-year-old, 13-year-old thumb that's gone old, basically. All right, anyway, so this is important. When it comes to the things that are naturally desirable to children and youngsters, things that are naturally desirable, part of their natural shahwa, Islam doesn't usually restrict it, right? Parents need to get involved. Now, in the things that our kids desire, there's much that is haram. There's a lot that is haram. But if they're not busy with the halal, then the haram will appeal to them and we won't be able to control it. And the best way to keep them busy with the halal is to also be involved. Is to also be involved and to promote it. If you don't, if it's about, they open the door, let them out in the morning on a Saturday, and it does, and like, as long as they come back home by a particular time, it doesn't matter, and you're hardly ever involved, you don't know what it is that they're doing, you don't organize anything, don't do any of those things, then everything that they do in those hours isn't going to be halal. And some of it's going to become really, really bad habits, right? Now, that's individually as parents, right? Now, as a community, you're a community, let's say, right? Muslims go on about the fact that, leisure is permissible in Islam. The Prophet ﷺ he promoted swimming and archery and horse riding and wrestling, right? Yeah? Okay. Where are the Muslim swimming clubs? Where are they? Right? Where are the Muslim horse riding clubs? The Prophet ﷺ promoted these things. Why aren't we promoting them? Where are they? Okay? Or do we have to do that on the Wii? With like a Wii remote. Is that it? You know, all right, can't ride horses. What about cycling? That's a good alternative. That's a good alternative, right? The most cycling our children do is, well, I don't know, but the Wii is one of them. Yeah? But it's not proper cycling. I mean, they're just jumping on a bike and showing off the bike to somebody else. It's love of wealth. Yeah, I've got a BMX. I've got the latest BMX. They don't really cycle to anywhere. They don't actually, it's not something that's influencing their lifestyle. Obviously, it's not going to, because dad needs to go 100 feet. Needs to go in, get in the car and turn it on to go the 100 feet. So obviously, the kids are going to develop that kind of laziness as well. All right? But anyway, so we don't have that. Shooting, archery, I don't know, something along those lines, organized by the Muslim community, nah. Wrestling, okay, something along those lines, I don't know, jiu-jitsu, judo, martial arts, that kind of thing. Among Muslims, nope. Muslim clubs, no. You have one in your community? You have many? How many kids here do judo or jiu-jitsu? Ah, that's a surprise. No, it's not a surprise. It's exactly what's expected. So we talk about leisure, the Prophet ﷺ doing this, that. Oh, and the Habashis, they were doing these things with their spears, and Aisha radiallahu anha was watching. And Imams love to talk about this stuff on the minbar. There's no attempt to give any room for these things to happen in the community. Like maybe in the basement of the masjid, or in the extension of the masjid, or maybe rent a hall somewhere, maybe parents getting together to organize these kind of things. It doesn't happen. You know what? If it did, that would be a good chunk of the week of your child, your son, your daughter. These are not all male sports, by the way. Girls can do it as well. That's the other thing. Oh, no, you can't do it. You're a girl. No, girls can do it as well. Right? Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anhu. You know who he is, right? Yeah, his daughters used to ride. His daughters used to ride. All right? You know, when it comes to judo or whatever it is, right? You know, martial arts or something like that. And it's great fun. I've done it. It's awesome, right? It's a great thing to do, all right? Oh, it's not a boys thing, right? Because if it was a boys only thing, then there wouldn't be sahabiyat on the battlefield. Because how in the world are they going to be on the... How in the world did Sahabiya fight in the battle, defend the Prophet ﷺ in Uhud, eventually lose her arm in a battle if she didn't know how to fight? Right? If it wasn't something that she practiced. Right? So we need to get away from this idea that there's the boys' domain and the girls' domain, and like without any shari'i reason, without any Islamic reason, just block girls out from things. Because we think it's not appropriate for them. It's not about what you think. It's about what it is in the Sharia. Okay? So we have to create opportunities in order to give our youngsters a better chance in the future. You don't provide the halal, the haram will take over. If you don't look after your garden, what's going to happen? Weeds are going to grow. And in the lives of our children, in the lives of our youth, the weeds are the haram desires. Those are the weeds. They're going to grow in place of the halal ones, right? So not all desires are bad. Desires are neutral, right? Islam gives room for desires to be fulfilled, but sometimes we don't give room for them to be fulfilled. We have to create the space for desires to be fulfilled in the halal way, whether it's marriage, whether it's community, family, whether it's enjoying leisurely activities together, etc., etc. We don't create that space, haram will naturally and automatically take over. Jazakumullah khairan. Sorry I came late. Okay, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all the tawfiq, inshallah, to do what is required of us individually, okay, and as families, as well as communities, inshallah ta'ala, so that we can have a bright future. Each one of these young people that I see, these beautiful faces, each one of you is a massive, massive asset to this ummah, right? And it's our responsibility to collectively, and if you understand what I'm saying, then it's your responsibility as well, because you're understanding now, to make sure that you remain an asset and that you don't deviate off somewhere else. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. سبحان الله وبحمده سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك اللهم ونتوب إليك وصلى الله تعالى وسلم على سيدنا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. السلام عليكم.